And joining us now here in studio, Mr. Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. The U.S. state of Michigan held its presidential primary vote with Donald Trump winning the Republican ballot and Joe Biden taking the Democratic nod. No surprises there, but with Biden winning 81% of the vote, the runner-up at 13% were ballots marked uncommitted. Most of them presumably cast by members of the Arab American community, upset by Biden's support of Israel's battle against Hamas. So how much of a worry should this be for Biden in a key swing state? David Christopher Kaufman, adjunct fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. Thank you so very much, DCK, for joining us. So Michigan or Michigas?
I think it's a bit of both, and thank you for having me. Biden won a huge victory yesterday in the Democratic primary in Michigan, but there were a lot of losses for him. This organization that was trying to get folks to vote non-committed, and then a sort of a protest vote against Biden, a protest vote against Democrats, a protest vote against Biden's Gaza policy. They've been hoping for 10,000 votes. In the end, they got 100,000 votes. That's a huge victory, symbolic victory, and that's a sizable percentage. I mean, don't forget, Hillary Clinton lost Michigan in 2016 by just, I think, like about 11,000 votes. That could have delivered her the White House. And then in 2020, Biden only won Michigan by around 160,000 votes. And so you had 100,000 votes last night, basically saying we are not going to vote for anybody. And that, again, while that might not necessarily mean those votes would go for Trump, those votes could, in the end, hand Trump a victory. And really, I'm not really sure that's in anybody's best interests.
So Dan Perry joining us here in the studio. How bad is bad? Maybe it's not as bad as we thought.
If you're, I would say if you're Vladimir Putin, then it's not very bad at all. Although he's pretending to prefer Biden now. Look, DCK was saying that Biden won Michigan by 160,000 votes last time, just a bit under. There are 200,000 registered Muslim voters in Michigan, somewhat over. And we see that they were able to make, I assume it was mostly them, making a pretty big statement to the tune of 100,000 votes just this week. So this clearly endangers Michigan for Biden. I mean, you could argue that other factors, suburban housewives angry at the abortion issue, might even it out, but it's obviously on a knife's edge. And it's pretty clear that if he loses Michigan, he probably loses the election.
Well, weirder things have happened. David Christopher Kaufman, do you think that Trump can secure the Arab vote?
That would be
listen, the first thing Trump did when he got into office was that he announced his now infamous Muslim ban on travelers from mostly Arab countries. So I think that Trump getting the Arab vote is not likely. I think there's a few other big worries here. The big worry, number one, is that this kind of ideology creep, this idea that we're going to have these protest votes by disaffected progressive voters, it could easily spread with. But I think that there's actually a far bigger kind of symbolic issue here, which is that, what the Arab community and the Muslim community has done in Michigan is somewhat unprecedented. They've rallied their troops, their people, to vote for the interests of their home country, of Palestine, of Gaza, over their own interests of Americans. And in many ways, that's quite anti-American. That's something that minority groups, and particularly immigrant groups, don't do in America. We don't tell Mexican American voters to vote with the interests of their Mexican families back in Mexico. And most importantly, if Jews were to ever organize and publicly vote in favor of Israel over their own interests in America, that would be considered, treasonous. And it just reflects the double standard of this entire conflict and the ways in which the needs of some communities, in this case, Arab communities, are constantly privileged over the needs of Jewish communities.
Well, just as a side note, American Jewry and Jewish communities all over the world were traditionally blamed for this dual commitment or dual identity, if you will. Dan Perry, yes.
I mean, American Jews do vote oftentimes with Israel as a very dominant factor. The difference is that voting on in an American election, while you're thinking of how that impacts Israel, with Jews doesn't necessarily harm them in America. Whereas if Muslims actually voted for Trump because they're angry at Biden, that would potentially harm him. This is a guy who initiated the Muslim ban. But I have to go back to the numbers. I mean, there's huge issues, but then there's also little numbers. They don't need to vote for Trump to cause massive troubles for Biden. In Michigan, all they have to do is stay home. Now, voting in a primary, as a protest vote in a primary, is very different from actually staying home in November. That would be really something, as David says, if they really did that.
But if we listen to some of the people that were interviewed in Michigan ballots, they say clearly, we rather have Trump, and we're talking about young liberal youngsters, we rather have few years of Trump to to swallow the bitter pill just for the sake of changing the DNA of the Democratic Party a few years from now.
We don't necessarily expect our government to protect our progressive ideals or support our progressive ideals. We don't necessarily expect the government to represent us. So if we choose somebody else, then what's the worst that can happen? And also, we have the precedent of the Never Hillary movement in 2016. It's not so much about all those folks who voted for Trump in 2016. It's about all those folks who stayed home and didn't vote for Hillary in 2016.
Well, this is a perfect case of the great being the enemy of the good from the perspective of the progressives. What could go bad if we vote for Trump? What could be so horrible? Well, they could end up with millions, tens of millions more people off healthcare rolls. They could end up with taxation that increases inequality. They could end up with NATO being dismantled and autocrats all over the world being encouraged. And by the way, a more pro-Israel president even than Biden.
But it's not in their name. And this is what they're saying. It's the other side.
So they don't care about the outcome. It's lunacy. Look, a lot of people are calling the far left in America to talk about them as communists, much as others call the far right of the MAGA crowd fascists. But you know what? It is a Marxist-Leninist idea that things have to get terrible before they can get better.
Or there is
and if they have their way, they will certainly get terrible.
So much a part of the far left and the progressive movement is about really playing into victimhood. And we are victims of this group or that group, or victims of Jews or victims of Israel. So, what better victimhood stance would there be for progressives to exist under a second Trump presidency and see more of their rights move back? And of course, what they're going to say is this is because of Israel.
Right.
I have to add, a lot of it is ignorance also. You have this Marxist-Leninist idea. You have some calculations, but you also have people who simply don't know that when they support Hamas, they're supporting people who would kill them for being gay.
David Christopher Kaufman, Dan Perry, thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.